In today's video, I want to share with you my experience of going through the PhD Viva process, the road to becoming a doctor. My PhD Viva took place on October 24th, which at this point is just a little bit over a week ago. I'll be sharing how I experienced the Viva and a little bit about the preparation as well and how I was feeling in the lead up to it. Post PhD thesis submission, I went on a trip. I had a good couple of weeks not thinking about the PhD because I was back into the swing of new lecturing classes, new classes in the business, and just busy. I was dealing with a lot more anxiety than normal during this period. I wasn't thinking about the PhD, but I would find there would be little things that would happen that would just send me into an anxiety spiral. I was just having a really strong panic reaction to very minor things, nothing to do with the PhD. It's likely that this is to do with that PhD submission and just the culmination of 4 years of work and the kind of latent stress that's underneath all of that, as well as the shift going from one image of yourself as a student, as a PhD student, and then being in this new schedule where I'm no longer a student, no longer a PhD student, and just this big shift in self-image, which led to a lot of anxiety due to the changes that were happening. So I think that's something to maybe be wary of, because I had a lot of people asking me, like, you've submitted your thesis, you must be feeling so relieved. And I was very much not feeling relaxed or relieved. I was glad that I no longer had to think about it, but I was definitely not feeling relaxed or relieved. Post Viva, I'm definitely feeling a lot more relaxed and relieved, but I think there's still going to be some difficulties in the coming months in the continuing shift from one image to another. I don't want to start things off on a negative note. I think it's something to be aware of if you end up feeling similarly, especially maybe post-submission, if you're feeling really down or really stressed. I think because you're working towards it for so many months and years, you're working towards this point of getting that thesis in, you just expect that you're going to feel amazing. And then when you don't, there's this kind of disconnect between, I think, yourself and your emotions. And that's definitely something that I find it really hard to deal with, because you're always looking forward to something, and when it's not quite what you expect, it can be really disheartening, I think. I don't want people to be alone in that, but I also don't want you to think that doesn't mean that feeling that way means that this wasn't worthwhile, because I definitely don't think that. I'm not trying to say that this shouldn't be something to work towards. I definitely think doing a PhD is one of the best things I will have ever done. It's just that I think it's important to also come at things with a reality check of it's okay not to feel amazing after you finish. It might take some time before you can really appreciate the level of work that's been done and acknowledge that what you've done is great and acknowledge that your work is great. I don't think I felt that post-PhD submission. I'm definitely feeling that more in the Viva. So even though the Viva can be something that people are scared for, I actually definitely found it to be something that reconnected me to my work and allowed me some closure for this chapter of my life. And then in the couple of weeks before the Viva, I started to do my prep work for the Viva. And during that time, I really found myself feeling really proud of the work that I had done. And I found that all of the kind of fears that I might have been having about going through the Viva process and being worried that the examiners were just going to hate my research and tell me it was crap, all of those kind of fears started to fade away, because I still felt very proud of that research and I felt like I could back up what I'd done and justify a lot of the decisions that I'd made. There were definitely a couple of weak points that I was conscious of and worried about, which were around the related work, because so much of it is sports science work that it's a challenging thing for me to describe at times, but I do think I knew it reasonably well. And then also the fact that a lot of the related work was built from what my supervisor had done in the past, because they had already done a significant literature review paper early on in my PhD. That meant that I was able to build from a lot of those ideas, but because in parts I hadn't approached the search process in the same way, it just felt like I wasn't as connected to the literature. And then the other kind of point I was concerned of was about the ability to back up what I had done as applied research, and the worry that it's not a significant contribution to the field of machine learning if it's applied, which I know is not true. Applied research is really valid, but I was uncertain about answering that question, though in recent months I've been lecturing in a class of applied research, and I think that has really strengthened my ability to justify applied research. The other thing I was worried about was like the methods that we used. Would there be questions of the way we approached the data, which there were, and were there going to be questions about the type of modelling that we used and the justification for those? And at the end of the day, you need to be prepared for those types of questions to come up, and all of these questions did come up. But I think having the awareness that they would come up did definitely help for when they did come up. So in the preparation process, I was definitely feeling a lot more confident. And the difficult thing during this period is everyone's going to be telling you, oh, you're definitely going to pass, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't help, I think, for me when somebody says that. I don't feel any sense of reassurance. So it almost makes me feel more afraid of failing if everyone's telling me that it's going to go really well. Because then it's, if I do fail, then that's really embarrassing. And everyone has this image of me that I'm going to breeze through this. And what if I actually do a really bad job? So I definitely don't feel any sense of reassurance when people say things like that. And a lot of people were saying that, which I found difficult. On the day of the Viva then, in the morning I was doing my final small bit of preparations. I started to feel pretty nervous. Just like the kind of bodily sense of nervousness. Even though I was feeling good about it, I was also feeling the physical sensations of anxiety. I had a personal training session that morning, which really just cured me of that. I was so glad of it. So it was definitely something that it really just reset me for the day. My friend Courtney, who I did my PhD with, and there's a number of people I did my PhD with, but she would have been the person that I would have been closest to in the process. She asked if I wanted her to be there, and I would have not asked anyone to come. So I was really glad that she offered, because it was nice to have somebody else on campus that knew that I was doing the Viva. And we went for breakfast, and she was really great for getting my mind off it. She's a very good energy, which I think was really good to have on that day. And I'm so thankful for her for being there with me. I didn't really tell anyone that I was doing the Viva except for her, like in the PhD space. I did tell a couple of people the dates when they asked, but I didn't put anything on social media before the day. And I just didn't really want people to know, again, in case the outcome was negative. Even in the video, which I just recorded about the likelihood of the outcomes of a Viva, I know failing is virtually impossible. For when you've gotten to a point where you've had your thesis be approved after a few years, and also you've published a number of works. I knew it was basically impossible to fail it, but I still had that fear of it regardless of that. And that's just irrational, but also that's just how you feel. On the morning of, we went into the university. We had breakfast. I had gone to the room beforehand just to make sure I knew where it was. There was someone in there. And then when we went there, again, half an hour before the Viva, which was scheduled for 11 o'clock, Courtney just kicked them out of the room because they weren't meant to be there. They were just in there doing some work themselves. So then I was getting set up. It was in a smaller room than ideal, and there wasn't really much desk space. And then pretty near to the time, no one else was there, and I started to get worried that I was in the wrong place, that in the months that I hadn't been on campus, that the building had somehow moved to somewhere else. And then my supervisor was there, which I was like, great, okay, so I am in the right place. And he helped to get the space set up, because it just wasn't set up how a Viva room should be set up, and I didn't know that. So basically you just want enough space for everyone to be able to sit down, like the two examiners and yourself. So we needed two big desks like across from each other. My primary supervisor couldn't come in person and didn't want to like have it be rearranged on their account. He just came online and that was fine for me. I think as well, like it's nice to have your supervisors there because you can see them afterwards, but also within the Viva in the questions, I would definitely be feeling uncertain about some of my answers. And I think having other people there who I think know all the answers is nerve-wracking at the same time. I then was still uncertain about the room until the chair of my Viva and the examiners came up. The chair was the centre director of the Centre for Research Training that my PhD was a part of, so I know him pretty well. And I was really glad that it was someone I knew who was the chair. Just again, another familiar face, which is nice. And then the internal examiner I knew, the external examiner I didn't know. So we did our introductions and just got the room ready. And then it was time for me to do my presentation. Just to say, my friend Courtney left like 15 minutes before because you can't have visitors in the one that I had anyways. Different universities will have different rules. My secondary supervisor was there in person, but the supervisor can't say anything during the Viva and neither can the chair. It's only the examiners really that are allowed to say anything and ask questions, and the candidate is the only person who can really answer those. I did my presentation, that went fine, and then it was time to sit down for the Q&A. My Viva in total was 3 hours, and when I told people afterwards, like people were like, whoa, because typically in my university at least, it's not typical to go quite to 3 hours. It'd be more like 2 hours, 2.5, 3 is on the long end. I think just in the specific department I'm in, it was a little bit unusual, but it also comes down to what the external examiner thinks is the right timeline, and it's possible they thought 3 hours was what was required. But it absolutely flew by. It went by so quickly. It did not feel like that length of time. Pretty much once I sat down, the external examiner more or less said the outcome of this is going to be positive. So he said that I had passed based on their assessment of the thesis, obviously Viva pending, but that it was going to be a positive outcome. Now that again should have provided reassurance, and yet I still felt really nervous. I felt, okay, so anything I say now is taking away that pass that I have. Again, filled me with still dread. I should have felt better, but I didn't. In the questions, there were questions like, why is the thesis named like this? And the point of it is they're trying to get you to defend your work and justify the decisions that were made. And it's trying to also make sure it's not just your supervisor doing everything and you haven't had any thoughts on this whatsoever. So a lot of the questions that are like clarifying things or asking how things were decided, these are trying to understand your role in this. But it does definitely it can feel like an attack. I'm a very sensitive person. I take questions very personally. For me, it feels like the questions are a personal attack, and that instead of asking a curiosity question, which is, oh, I wonder why you decided to name it like this, I view it as, this is the wrong name for this thesis. Why on earth would you call it this? And it's something I'm trying to work on to not experience things in that way, but there's still work to be done in that regard. To answer these questions and explain, so the title of my thesis was Using Machine Learning to Support Physical Exercise, particularly for marathon runners. And because running is one of the most popular forms of physical exercise, I think it's the second most popular form of exercise in Ireland. And nowadays, a lot of the recreational runners are looking to do these endurance competitions in order to test themselves. And a lot of people want to get to the marathon distance as a personal test, and they wouldn't view themselves as athletes. So it is exercise, and that these concepts can be brought into other sports like cycling, swimming. And then that meant that this kind of answer led into the generalizability of the work, which is again a fear point of mine, was whether this work is generalizable. So it was talking about how different sports, particular ones that it would be just pretty much directly applicable to, and then other ones where the concepts would be relevant, but the application would be challenging due to the kind of data that's involved. So that was like one of the early questions. There were different questions such as, why did I include age as a feature in one chapter and not in other chapters? And questions like that were frustrating because these experiments were done independently. Then essentially at the end, I was putting together the data sets. It just meant that there was a little bit of inconsistency at times, and it was just frustrating because I didn't have a good answer for that. I did, in a sense, that like when it came to what we thought we were looking at, which is injuries, age is an important factor, and we want to see are more older runners getting injured. But when it comes to performance, a lot of that kind of age information will be encoded in the pacing that we see in their training. So it's not necessarily something that needs to be included in a performance model. It's just things like that. I was like, oh, that's annoying. There were a lot of questions when it came to the decisions that were being made for the data set and how we derived features from it, linking back to the sports science literature, or bits of analysis of that data that, again, linking back to the sports science literature. And at times I definitely felt very flustered, not knowing the names of the authors of different papers, but being able to point to the general direction of them. So I felt like I should have known them better. I was able to talk about the findings of papers, but I wasn't able to point to where on my list of 300 and something references where specifically something was coming from. I was like beating myself up for that in the moment. Same thing, we were talking about the limitations of the data, and just sometimes that can just make you feel like when you're talking about these limitations that basically the work is worthless. And it's interesting to try and separate out how you're feeling in this versus what's actually happening. And it's really hard to do that because I might have been feeling like this was going really badly, but afterwards both of my supervisors said that sounded like it was going really well. And the perception of reality can be very different depending on whose seat you're sitting in. Because I'm thinking, God, this is awful. These questions are tough. I don't know how to answer these, even though I am answering them. I can't in the moment. If I don't feel 100% in an answer, I feel like it's crap when it's not, but it's just how I felt in it. So a lot of time was spent on the first couple of chapters, and there was feedback being given more so from the internal examiner. They weren't asking as many questions. It was more like commentary. They said that my introduction and related work needed work. And I was just, yeah, whatever was feedback, I was just, yeah. I pretty much didn't put up a fight with any of that because I agreed with it as well. So I didn't mind. I had a sense that these were going to be changes that would be made, and they all sounded like fine changes. Perfectly easy to, not easy, but much easier than they could have been if the changes were greater. And then after we gotten through the first 4 chapters, which for my thesis was about the introduction, the related work, the data set, and the kind of analysis of the data. So a lot of the questions were about the data and the choices of the data and the related work and how that tied in with the data and the choices. So once we got to that point, they asked if I wanted a break, and I was thinking, well, it's probably been about an hour. I'm actually okay. But then they just advised going for a break anyway. So we had 5 minutes. I just wandered around, went to the toilet, came back. And then the external examiner reinforced again, the outcome of this is going to be positive. I'm conscious about time, getting up to the 3 hours, because we're actually 2 hours in at this point. And I was like, whoa, did not feel like we've been sitting here for 2 hours talking about this stuff. So even though I was finding it difficult, it was also flying by. So it was interesting that had gone so fast. So now it was moving on to my kind of technical chapters. And then the discussion for the second half was a lot easier, I found. I think because I have more confidence in those chapters than in the first couple. The dataset chapter, it's just, you could have gone anyway with it. And then the related work, it's tough to tie everything in. Whereas the latter, like the 3 technical chapters and the conclusion and feature work, I was really confident on those. So whenever questions were being asked, I just found I was able to answer them and not feel the same self-doubt answering them. So when I was asked why did I do these model comparisons, I was able to say I felt it would be a disservice not to compare the method that we were using here to other machine learning models, because once all of the setup is done, it's pretty simple to implement these models, so it might as well be done. And I just felt like I was able to answer those questions a lot better. And a lot of the time, the questions I was being asked in this half were more about summarizing the work, and summarizing was pretty easy because I've talked about this work a lot. Try to think what kind of questions were being asked around this point that were like maybe a bit jarring. And I'm not really sure. I felt, again, pretty good about the questions that were being asked here. It was quicker at this point. So we were going through it chapter by chapter, but the latter few chapters, it was quicker. There was a good discussion going on. And a lot of the time I was able to just come back to the idea of explainability and then come back to another point that came up a lot, which was one of the particular limitations of the data that I work with is that we don't have labels or we don't have information from runners. So we don't know when something happens to the data, we don't know why. And one of the kind of questions that the internal examiner asked was if I could take away one of the limitations, what one would it be? And I said this one. And a lot of the time when we were coming back to different things, I was just coming back to that idea of the labels and how great that would be to have that and what we could do with that. And so that kind of led to a lot of the discussion around future work and limitations and what we were able to do with this data at this point. So I think even the external examiner felt like I was talking a bit down on the research at times because the thesis as it is discussing what we're able to do with all these limitations and acknowledging that's still substantial work. That kind of part was pretty okay. Felt much better in the second half, felt a lot more relaxed. So I was glad I took the break. And then it was time to head out for the kind of deliberation, which was pretty brief. And then I got back in and they told me that I'd passed the Viva with minor corrections. So got a load of handshakes and Dr. Ciara was put out there for the first time, which was great. And their feedback was very positive. It feels in the defense, it feels like, for me anyways, it felt like they thought it was terrible and here's all the stuff that's wrong with it, but that's just not what it's about. It's about you defending your work and being able to say, no, this is the work and this is why it was done this way. And, the external examiner said it was really rare to find someone who'd mastered two areas so well because that's what you need to do in applied research. And that was great feedback for me to get. I felt really proud of myself. The internal examiner afterwards said that was a great thesis and they enjoyed reading it. And it was nice to hear that. And yeah, that was it. That was what it was like. I don't want to feel like I've said a lot of negative things. I just wanted to explain like this is how I was feeling in it. But overall, the experience was very positive. It was hard and it should be difficult. Like you should feel like there's a challenge in it. Otherwise, it's like, why did I do all this work? I think there needs to be a challenge to it. Otherwise, you just don't have that same sense of achievement. When you're submitting the thesis, it just feels so, okay, there it is, off it goes. Whereas this kind of exam really makes you feel like, wow, I've done a lot here. I've done a lot of work. It was worthwhile. I feel like I've grown a lot as a researcher and I deserve this degree. I think you need that kind of process to feel that sense of closure, to feel that sense of achievement. And I'm really glad that it went the way it did. Like, I'm glad that it was that hard. I'm glad I was asked those questions. There's nothing that I would change about the experience at all. So yeah, it was great to see my co-supervisor afterwards anyways and see them, and we get an email sent around when anyone passes. So my primary supervisor sent that around and I got lots of congratulations messages from other researchers. And it's been a really nice kind of experience. Afterwards, my friend Courtney was there. She had gotten me a card that said Dr. Feely and a bottle of Prosecco. So good celebrations. And she took me to the student bar, had a load of drinks, and we got a couple of students who were around down. Even though I hadn't told people what was going on, I'm very grateful that a couple of people came by to see me on that day. It was nice. Since then, I still haven't done any kind of big celebration. My family did like a champagne toast at the weekend. And yeah, I still don't know how I want to celebrate it. I do feel like I need to mark the occasion properly, but I don't know how. I haven't seen my primary supervisor since, but I'm going to see him pretty soon and we're going to nail down my future research assistant position. So there you go. That's what it was like for me. I hope this video was not a downer. I just wanted to explain what it was like for me. I overall feel very positive about the Viva process and I'm so glad of it. I definitely feel like, yes, it's hard. Yes, you need to prepare for it and you shouldn't skip out on doing that. You should feel challenged in it. But overall, all of that is what's going to lead to you feeling, I hope, that sense of achievement afterwards that I'm now getting to feel finally. I feel like I just didn't have that same feeling post thesis submission. So best of luck if this is coming up soon for you. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and I'll see you all in the next video.